and the young Apache girl left alone at her mother's grave until a silent cowboy took her hand and changed everything. Chapter 1. The Last Goodbye. The sun hung low over the mesquite-dotted plains of West Texas, casting long shadows across the weathered landscape. The year was 1885, and the wind carried the scent of sage and dust through the sparse vegetation that struggled to survive in this harsh land. Near a solitary oak tree, its branches gnarled by years of relentless sun and wind, a small mound of earth marked a fresh grave. Ayanna knelt beside the burial site, her 12-year-old frame trembling not from the cool evening breeze, but from the weight of grief that pressed down on her chest like a stone. Her mother, Itzel, had been the last connection to her Apache heritage, the final thread linking her to a world that seemed to be disappearing with each passing day. The traditional burial had been simple, following the customs her mother had taught her, but now Ayanna faced the terrifying reality of being completely alone. Her dark hair, braided with the colorful beads her mother had given her, caught the fading light. She wore a simple dress made from trader's cloth, a compromise between her Apache roots and the necessity of blending into a world that viewed her people with suspicion and fear. The dress was torn in places, evidence of the difficult journey that had brought them to this remote corner of Texas, far from the reservation where they had once lived. "Ama," she whispered in Apache, using the word for mother that felt so natural on her tongue. "What do I do now?" The silence that answered her was deafening. No gentle voice would respond, no warm hand would stroke her hair, no stories would be shared around a small fire. The loneliness was so complete, it felt like a physical presence, wrapping around her like a cold blanket. Ayanna's stomach cramped with hunger. She hadn't eaten in 2 days. The small amount of jerky and dried corn her mother had carried was gone, consumed during Itzel's final illness. The nearest town, Esperanza Creek, was at least a day's walk, and Ayanna knew that a young Apache girl walking alone into a Texas town would face more danger than help. As the sun continued its descent, painting the sky in shades of orange and red, Ayanna made a decision that seemed to come from somewhere deep within her. She would stay here, beside her mother's grave, until whatever fate awaited her arrived. She had no strength left to fight, no hope left to carry her forward. She curled up against the base of the oak tree, using her thin shawl as a blanket. The night sounds of the prairie began their familiar chorus, the distant howl of coyotes, the rustle of small creatures moving through the brush, the whisper of wind through the branches above her. These sounds had once been comforting, part of the natural world her mother had taught her to respect and understand. Now they seemed to mock her solitude. As darkness fell completely, Ayanna closed her eyes and tried to remember her mother's stories. Tales of brave Apache warriors, of the spirits that lived in the mountains, of the time before the white settlers came and changed everything. But even these memories felt distant now, like echoes from a world that no longer existed. The temperature dropped with the sun, and Ayanna pulled her shawl tighter around her shoulders. She was so tired, so empty, that sleep seemed impossible. Yet somehow, as the hours passed, exhaustion overcame grief, and she drifted into a restless slumber beside her mother's grave. In her dreams, she saw her mother's face, kind and weathered, speaking words she couldn't quite hear. There was something urgent in Itzel's expression, as if she were trying to tell her daughter something important. But the words faded with the dream, leaving only the echo of a voice that would never speak again. When dawn broke over the Texas plains, Ayanna woke to find herself still alone, still hungry, still lost. But something had changed during the night. In the distance, barely visible against the morning haze, she could see the silhouette of a rider approaching across the prairie. Her heart raced. In her experience, solitary riders in this part of Texas meant trouble for someone like her. She pressed herself against the tree, trying to make herself as small as possible, hoping the rider would pass by without noticing the grave or the girl beside it. But as the figure drew closer, she realized that hiding was impossible. The rider was heading directly toward her, as if he had known exactly where to find her. Chapter 2. the silent stranger. The rider emerged from the morning mist like a specter from another world. He sat tall in his saddle, his silhouette cutting a stark figure against the pale yellow sky. His horse, a sturdy brown Mustang with white markings, moved with the steady gait of an animal accustomed to long journeys across difficult terrain. As he drew closer, Ayana could make out more details of this mysterious stranger. He was a man of perhaps 30 years, with sun-weathered skin and dark hair that fell to his shoulders beneath a well-worn hat. His clothes were practical: leather chaps, a cotton shirt that had seen better days, and boots that bore the scars of countless miles. What struck Ayana most was his face, strong-featured and serious, with deep-set eyes that seemed to hold secrets. There was something about his bearing that suggested he was comfortable in this harsh landscape, as if he belonged here among the thorns and dust. Most remarkably, he made no sound as he approached, no calls of greeting, no questions about what she was doing there. He simply rode steadily toward her, his eyes fixed on the small figure huddled beside the grave. Ayana's instincts screamed at her to run, but her legs felt like lead. She had heard too many stories from her mother about what happened to Apache children who fell into the wrong hands. Some were taken to distant schools, where they were forbidden to speak their language or practice their customs. Others simply disappeared, their fate unknown. The fear was so sharp it felt like a knife in her chest. The man reined in his horse about 20 feet away and sat quietly, studying her. Up close, she could see that his eyes were a deep brown, almost black, and there was something in them that didn't match the hardness of his weathered face. It wasn't cruelty she saw there, but something she couldn't quite identify. Sadness, perhaps, or recognition. They stared at each other in silence for what felt like an eternity. Ayana pressed her back against the oak tree, her hands gripping the bark so tightly that it left marks on her palms. The man showed no sign of impatience or aggression. He simply waited, as if he understood that she needed time to decide whether he was friend or foe. Finally, he dismounted with fluid grace, his boots making soft sounds in the dust. He was tall, much taller than Ayana had expected, and his movements were deliberate and controlled. He approached slowly, his hands visible and empty, stopping when he was still several feet away from her. "You're alone," he said, and his voice was surprisingly gentle. It carried a slight accent she couldn't place, and there was a roughness to it that suggested he didn't use it often. "How long?" Ayana found herself unable to answer. The words seemed trapped in her throat, held back by fear and exhaustion. She could only stare at this stranger who had appeared as if from nowhere, trying to understand what he wanted from her. The man's eyes moved to the fresh grave, and something flickered across his face. Understanding, perhaps, or sympathy. He stood quietly for a moment, as if paying his respects to the person buried there. Then he looked back at Ayana, and she saw something in his expression that made her heart skip. Without warning, he reached into his saddlebags and pulled out a small bundle wrapped in cloth. He approached slowly, his movements careful and non-threatening, until he was close enough to set the bundle down within her reach. Then he stepped back, giving her space. "Food," he said simply. "Water, too." Ayana stared at the bundle, her stomach clenching with hunger. She wanted to reach for it, but fear held her back. In her experience, nothing came without a price, and she had nothing left to give. The man seemed to understand her hesitation. He walked back to his horse and pulled a canteen from his saddle, taking a long drink before corking it and setting it beside the food. Then he did something that completely surprised her. He sat down in the dust, cross-legged, and waited. The sun climbed higher, and still he sat there, patient and silent. Occasionally, he would look toward the horizon, scanning the landscape with the practiced eye of someone who had learned to watch for danger. But mostly, he simply waited, as if he had all the time in the world. Finally, hunger overcame caution. Ayana reached for the bundle with trembling hands, unwrapping it to find dried meat, hardtack, and even some dried fruit. The food was simple but substantial, and she ate it slowly, savoring every bite. The man watched her eat without comment, his expression unreadable. When she had finished, he spoke again, his voice still gentle but carrying an undertone of urgency. "This isn't a safe place for you to be alone. There are men who ride these parts. men who wouldn't hesitate to hurt a child. Ayana found her voice at last, though it came out as barely more than a whisper. "I have nowhere else to go." The man nodded, as if he had expected this answer. "Your mother?" he asked, gesturing toward the grave. Ayana's eyes filled with tears, but she managed to nod. The man was quiet for a long moment, his gaze distant. When he spoke again, his voice was even softer than before. "I'm sorry for your loss. I know what it's like to lose everything." There was something in his tone that made Ayana look at him more closely. She saw the same kind of pain in his eyes that she felt in her own heart, the pain of someone who had been left behind, who had lost everything that mattered. "What's your name?" she asked, surprised by her own boldness. "Cole," he replied. "Cole Brennan." He paused, then added, "What's yours?" "Ayana," she said, and then, because it felt important to claim her heritage, "Ayana Apache." Cole nodded, as if the name meant something to him. "Ayana, that's a beautiful name. It means eternal blossom, doesn't it?" The fact that he knew the meaning of her name shocked her. Most white men she had encountered couldn't even pronounce Apache names correctly, let alone understand their significance. She stared at him with new curiosity. "How do you know that?" she asked. Cole's expression grew distant again. "I've spent time among your people. Many years ago." He stood up, brushing dust from his pants. "You can't stay here, Ayana. It's not safe. Will you come with me?" The question hung in the air between them like a challenge. Ayana felt torn between her fear of this stranger and her growing realization that she had no other choice. She looked at her mother's grave, then back at Cole, searching his face for some sign of his intentions. "Where would we go?" she asked. "South," Cole said, "to a place where you'll be safe, where you can grow up without fear." As he spoke, he extended his hand toward her, palm up, in a gesture of invitation rather than demand. Ayana stared at that outstretched hand, knowing that taking it would change everything. She would be leaving her mother's grave, the last connection to her old life, and trusting her fate to a man she had known for less than an hour. But as she looked into Cole's eyes, she saw something that made her decision for her. She saw the same loneliness that lived in her own heart, the same need for connection and belonging, and beneath his weather-beaten exterior, she sensed a kindness that her mother would have recognized and trusted. Slowly, hesitantly, she reached out and placed her small hand in his larger one. His skin was rough and calloused, but his grip was gentle and warm. As their hands touched, she felt something shift inside her, not hope exactly, but the possibility of hope. "I'll come with you," she whispered. Cole's face softened almost imperceptibly, and he helped her to her feet. "We'll take good care of each other," he said, and somehow Ayana believed him. Chapter 3. The journey begins. The preparation for departure was simple but deliberate. Cole helped Ayana gather the few possessions she had with her, a small bundle of her mother's belongings, including a silver bracelet that had been passed down through generations of Apache women, and a knife her mother had taught her to use for practical purposes. Everything else had been buried with Itzel, according to Apache custom. As they prepared to leave, Ayana felt the weight of abandoning her mother's grave. She knelt beside the mound one last time, placing her hand on the earth and whispering a prayer in Apache. Cole stood respectfully at a distance, his hat in his hands, waiting for her to finish her goodbye. "She would want you to live," he said softly when she finally stood. "She would want you to be safe." Ayana nodded, though the tears in her eyes made it difficult to see. She had no way of knowing if this was true, but something in Cole's tone convinced her that he understood the weight of what she was leaving behind. Cole's horse was strong enough to carry them both, and he helped Ayana up behind him. She had ridden before. Her mother had taught her on the reservation, but never with a stranger, never heading into an unknown future. As they rode away from the oak tree, she twisted around to watch her mother's grave disappear into the distance, marking the moment when her childhood officially ended. The rhythm of the horse's gait was soothing, and despite her anxiety, Ayana found herself relaxing slightly against Cole's back. He was warm and solid, and she could feel the steady rise and fall of his breathing. For the first time in days, she felt physically safe, even if her emotional world remained in turmoil. They rode southwest, following what appeared to be an old cattle trail that wound through the rolling hills of central Texas. The landscape was beautiful in its harsh way, endless stretches of grass and brush, punctuated by mesas and rock formations that jutted up from the earth like ancient monuments. The sky was a brilliant blue, decorated with white clouds that cast moving shadows across the prairie. As they traveled, Cole spoke occasionally, but his words were carefully chosen and meaningful. He pointed out landmarks, a distinctive rock formation that could be seen for miles, a creek that ran year-round and provided reliable water, a grove of trees that offered shade and shelter. It became clear that he knew this country intimately, that he had traveled these paths many times before. "How long have you been in Texas?" Ayanna asked during one of their rest stops. Cole was checking his horse's hooves, making sure no stones had become lodged there. "About 15 years, he said without looking up. "Came here after the war." "Which war?" "The one between the states." "The Civil War." He straightened up and looked at her with those serious, dark eyes. "I was just a boy then, not much older than you are now." Ayanna tried to imagine Cole as a child, but it was difficult. He seemed so weathered, so settled in his adult skin, that it was hard to picture him as anything but the man he was now. "Where did you come from?" she asked. Cole's expression grew distant. "Pennsylvania, a place called Gettysburg. Ever heard of it?" She shook her head. "Good," he said quietly. "It's not a place anyone should have to know about." They remounted and continued their journey, but Ayanna found herself thinking about Cole's words. There was pain in his voice when he mentioned his hometown, the same kind of pain she heard in her own voice when she talked about her mother. It seemed that both of them were carrying losses that had shaped who they had become. As the afternoon wore on, the landscape began to change. The rolling hills gave way to more dramatic terrain, deeper canyons, steeper cliffs, and rock formations that looked like they had been carved by giants. The vegetation became more sparse, and the sense of isolation more complete. "Where exactly are we going?" Ayanna asked as they descended into a particularly deep canyon. "There's a place," Cole said, guiding his horse carefully down the rocky path. "A ranch. The people there, they understand what it's like to be different, to be outsiders." "What kind of people?" Cole was quiet for a moment, as if deciding how much to tell her. "Good people," he said finally. "People who've learned that family isn't always about blood. Sometimes it's about choosing to care for each other." As they reached the bottom of the canyon, Ayanna saw a small stream running through the rocks, its water clear and cold. Cole dismounted and helped her down, and they both knelt by the water's edge to drink and splash their faces. The coolness was refreshing after the heat of the day. "Cole," she said as they sat in the shade of a large boulder, "why did you help me? You don't know me. You don't owe me anything." He was quiet for so long that she thought he might not answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. "I was lost once, too," he said. "Lost and alone, with nowhere to go and no one to turn to. Someone helped me then. Someone who didn't have to, but chose to anyway." He looked at her direct. "I guess I'm hoping to pass that kindness forward." "What happened to you?" Ayanna asked. Cole's jaw tightened slightly. "The war took everything. My family, my home, my sense of who I was supposed to be. I wandered for a long time, trying to figure out how to live in a world that didn't make sense anymore." "And someone helped you?" "Yes. An Apache woman, actually. She found me half dead in the desert, more broken than I had any right to survive. She and her family took me in, taught me how to live again, how to find meaning in helping others instead of just surviving." Ayanna felt her heart skip. "An Apache woman?" Cole nodded. "Her name was Ciala. She was a healer, a wise woman. She taught me your language, your customs. She showed me that there are different ways to be strong, different ways to be brave." "What happened to her?" Cole's expression grew dark. "The same thing that happens to most Apache people who try to live freely. The army found their camp. Ciala and her family were forced onto a reservation in New Mexico. I never saw her again." Ayanna felt a chill run down her spine. The story was all too familiar. It was the same pattern that had driven her own mother to leave the reservation to try to find a place where they could live according to their own traditions. "Is that why you know so much about Apache culture?" she asked. "It's why I respect it," Cole said, "and why I understand what you've lost." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, each lost in their own thoughts. Finally, Cole stood and offered his hand to help her up. "We should keep moving," he said. "We want to reach the ranch before nightfall." As they remounted and continued their journey, Ayana found herself seeing Cole in a new light. He wasn't just a stranger who had decided to help her out of pity or obligation. He was someone who understood loss, who had been shaped by the same kinds of experiences that had brought her to this point. And he was someone who had learned to transform his pain into compassion. The sun was beginning to set when they crested a hill and saw their destination spread out in the valley below. The ranch was modest but well maintained, with a main house, several outbuildings, and corrals filled with horses. Smoke rose from the chimney and warm light glowed in the windows, creating a scene of domestic tranquility that seemed almost too good to be true. "That's home," Cole said simply. As they rode down the hill toward the ranch, Ayana felt a mixture of hope and fear. She was grateful for Cole's kindness, but she had learned not to trust in the permanence of good things. Still, as they approached the house and she saw a woman step onto the porch to greet them, she allowed herself to imagine what it might be like to have a home again. The woman was tall and strong-looking, with graying hair pulled back in a practical bun. Her face was weathered but kind, and when she saw Ayana, her expression immediately softened with understanding. "You found her," the woman said to Cole, and there was relief in her voice. "I found her," Cole replied. "Maria, this is Ayana. Ayana, this is Maria Santos. She runs this place." Maria stepped forward and looked directly at Ayana, her eyes warm and welcoming. "Mija," she said, using the Spanish term of endearment, "you look hungry and tired. Come inside. Let's get you fed and settled." As Maria led them toward the house, Ayana felt something she hadn't experienced in weeks, the possibility that she might actually be safe. It was a fragile feeling, one that could be shattered by the slightest disappointment, but it was there nonetheless. Behind her, Cole unsaddled his horse and followed them inside, and Ayana realized that this strange, silent man had indeed changed everything. He had taken her hand and led her toward a new life, just as he had promised. Whether that life would be everything she hoped for remained to be seen, but for the first time since her mother's death, she was ready to find out. Chapter 4. The Santos Ranch. The interior of the ranch house was warm and welcoming, filled with the sense of cooking food and the soft glow of oil lamps. The furniture was simple but comfortable, and the walls were decorated with a mixture of Mexican and American artifacts that spoke of a family that had bridged two cultures. Ayana noticed Apache-style blankets draped over chairs and Mexican pottery on the shelves, creating an atmosphere that felt both familiar and exotic. Maria Santos moved through the house with the confidence of someone who had managed a household for many years. She was probably in her 50s, with strong hands and a direct manner that spoke of someone accustomed to taking charge. But there was also a warmth in her eyes that made Ayana feel immediately welcomed. "Sit," Maria said, gesturing to a chair at the kitchen table. "I'll get you something to eat." As Ayana sat down, she noticed that the kitchen was the heart of the house. It was spacious and well-equipped, with a large stove and plenty of counter space for preparing meals. The table was made of heavy oak and showed the wear of countless family meals. It was the kind of kitchen that spoke of abundance and generosity. Cole sat across from her, removing his hat and running his fingers through his hair. In the lamplight, Ayana could see the fine lines around his eyes and the gray threads in his dark hair. He looked tired, but also relieved, as if he had successfully completed a difficult task. "How did you know where to find me?" Ayana asked him. Cole exchanged a look with Maria before answering. "We heard about your mother's death from a trader who passed through Esperanza Creek. He mentioned seeing a young Apache girl at the burial site. You came looking for me specifically?" "We did," Maria said, setting a plate of food in front of Ayana. The meal was simple but substantial: beans, rice, and fresh tortillas, along with a piece of grilled meat that smelled wonderful. In a place like this, word travels fast about children who need help. Ayana ate slowly, savoring the flavors. It was the first real meal she'd had in days, and every bite felt like a small miracle. As she ate, she became aware of the sounds of the house, the creak of settling wood wood, the distant lowing of cattle, the quiet murmur of voices from other rooms. "Who else lives here?" she asked. "Several families," Maria explained. "Some are Mexican, some are American, and some are Apache. We have a few former soldiers, some people who lost their farms, and others who just needed a place to start over. It's like a community." "Exactly. We all work together, contribute what we can, and help each other through the difficult times." Maria sat down across from her. "The ranch belongs to my late husband and me, but we've always believed that land should be shared with people who need it." As if summoned by their conversation, a young man appeared in the doorway. He was perhaps 20 years old, with the sun-darkened skin of someone who worked outdoors. His clothes were practical ranch wear, and he moved with the easy confidence of someone comfortable in his surroundings. "This is Diego," Maria said. "My nephew. Diego, this is Ayana." Diego smiled and nodded respectfully. "Welcome," he said, his English accented but clear. "I hope you'll be happy here." "Diego helps manage the cattle," Maria explained. "He's been with us for 3 years now, ever since his own family." She trailed off, and Diego's expression grew somber. Ayana understood without being told that Diego, like her, had lost family and found refuge at the ranch. Over the next hour, Ayana was introduced to several other members of the household. There was Elena, a young Mexican woman who helped with cooking and household management. There was Tom, a former Union soldier who had been drifting since the war ended. And there was Joseph, an elderly Apache man who served as a sort of grandfather figure to everyone on the ranch. Each person had their own story of loss and recovery, their own reason for seeking sanctuary at the Santos Ranch. But what struck Ayana most was the way they all seemed to genuinely care for each other. There was a sense of family here that transcended blood relations. As the evening wore on, Maria showed Ayana to a small bedroom that would be hers. The room was simple but clean, with a comfortable bed, a washstand, and a window that looked out over the ranch yard. On the bed was a quilt that looked like it had been made by hand, and on the dresser was a small vase with wildflowers. "This was my daughter's room," Maria said quietly. "She died of fever 5 years ago. I've been hoping that someday another girl would need it." Ayana felt a pang of sadness for Maria's loss, but also a sense of honor that she was being trusted with something so precious. "Thank you," she said. "It's beautiful. There are clothes in the dresser that should fit you," Maria said. "And if you need anything during the night, just call. Someone is always awake." After Maria left, Ayana sat on the bed and looked around the room. It was the first space that had been truly hers since her mother's death, and the feeling was both wonderful and overwhelming. She opened the dresser and found several dresses and other clothing items, all clean and well-maintained. A soft knock on the door interrupted her thoughts. "Come in," she called. It was Joseph, the elderly Apache man. He was tall and lean, with long gray hair and deep lines in his face that spoke of a life filled with both joy and sorrow. His eyes were kind, but also penetrating, as if he could see directly into her soul. "I wanted to welcome you properly," he said in Apache. "It's been a long time since we've had one of our own people here." Ayana felt tears spring to her eyes at hearing her native language spoken with such warmth and familiarity. "Thank you," she replied in Apache. "I wasn't sure I would ever hear our language again." "You will hear it as often as you like," Joseph said, "and you will learn to speak it with pride, not fear. Here, you don't have to hide who you are." "Maria said you've been here for a while?" Joseph nodded. 3 years. I came here after my wife died. I was lost, like you are now. But Maria and Cole gave me a place to belong, and I've tried to help others find their way ever since. Cole mentioned that he learned Apache from a woman named Ciala. Joseph's expression grew thoughtful. "Yes, he told me about her. She was a wise woman, a healer. She taught him well, not just the language, but the spirit behind it. Do you trust him?" Joseph considered this carefully before answering. "I trust him with my life," he said finally. "And more importantly, I trust him with yours. He has a good heart, even if he doesn't always show it." After Joseph left, Ayana prepared for bed, changing into a clean nightgown she found in the dresser. As she lay down on the comfortable mattress, she felt the luxury of safety and cleanliness wash over her. For the first time in weeks, she wasn't afraid of what the morning might bring. But as she drifted off to sleep, her thoughts kept returning to Cole. There was something about him that intrigued her beyond his kindness in rescuing her. He was a man who had clearly been through terrible experiences, yet he had emerged with his capacity for compassion intact. And there was something in his eyes when he looked at her, not pity, but recognition, as if he saw in her the same potential for survival and growth that someone had once seen in him. Outside her window, she could hear the sounds of the ranch settling down for the night. Horses moving in the corrals, the distant sound of someone playing a guitar, the low murmur of conversation from the main room. These were the sounds of a community, of people who had chosen to build something together rather than face the world alone. For the first time since her mother's death, Ayana fell asleep without crying. And in her dreams, she saw not the past she had lost, but the future she might be able to build. Chapter 5. Finding Her Place. The morning sun streamed through the curtains of Ayana's new bedroom, waking her gently from the most restful sleep she'd had in weeks. For a moment she was disoriented, unsure where she was. Then the memories of the previous day came flooding back. Cole's appearance at her mother's grave, the journey to the ranch, the warm welcome from Maria and the others. She dressed quickly in one of the dresses from the dresser, a simple blue cotton garment that fit her reasonably well. As she brushed her hair and rebraided it, she could hear the sounds of the ranch coming to life outside her window. People were moving around, beginning their daily work, and the sound of voices mixed with the lowing of cattle and the neighing of horses. When she made her way to the kitchen, she found Maria already busy preparing breakfast. The older woman looked up with a warm smile. "Good morning, Mija. Did you sleep well?" "Yes, thank you. Better than I have in a long time." "Good. Breakfast is almost ready. Why don't you sit down and I'll get you some coffee?" As Ayana sat at the table, she noticed that several other people were already there: Diego, Elena, and Tom. They all greeted her warmly, and she was struck again by the sense of family that permeated the household. These people had clearly learned to depend on each other, to create their own support system in a world that could be harsh and unforgiving. Cole appeared in the doorway, looking like he'd been up for hours. His hair was damp from washing, and he wore clean clothes, but his eyes had the alert look of someone who had already been working. "Morning," he said, taking a seat across from her. "How did you sleep?" "Very well, thank you." She paused, then added, "I wanted to thank you again for everything." Cole looked uncomfortable with her gratitude. "No need to thank me, I'm just glad you're safe." Maria set plates of food in front of them. Eggs, bacon, and biscuits that smelled heavenly. As they ate, the conversation flowed easily around the table. Diego talked about the cattle that needed to be moved to a different pasture. Elena mentioned that they were running low on certain supplies, and Tom discussed some repairs that needed to be made to the barn. Ayana listened to these conversations with growing interest. There was something appealing about the way these people worked together, each contributing their skills and knowledge to the common good. It was different from the reservation life she remembered, but it had some of the same sense of community that her mother had always told her was essential for survival. After breakfast, Maria turned to her with a gentle smile. "Today, I thought we might figure out how you'd like to contribute around here. Everyone has jobs to do, and we'd like to find something that suits your interests and abilities." "What kind of jobs?" Ayana asked. "Well, there's cooking and household management, working with the animals, helping with the crops, or learning some of the business aspects of running a ranch. What appeals to you?" Ayana thought about this carefully. "I'd like to learn about all of it," she said finally. "My mother always said that the more skills you have, the better you can take care of yourself and others." Maria's smile widened. "Your mother was a wise woman. We'll start with a little bit of everything, and you can see what you enjoy most." The morning was spent with Elena, learning about the household routines. Ayana helped with laundry, learned how to preserve food, and assisted with meal preparation. Elena was patient and encouraging, and Ayana found herself enjoying the work. There was something satisfying about contributing to the daily life of the ranch, about being useful rather than just a burden. In the afternoon, Diego took her out to see the cattle. The ranch had a good-sized herd, and Diego explained how they managed the animals, moved them to different pastures, and prepared them for market. Ayana was fascinated by the complex logistics involved in ranch management. "It's like being the leader of a tribe," she said, watching Diego direct the movement of a group of cattle. "That's a good way to think about it," Diego agreed. "You have to understand the animals, know what they need, and make sure they're healthy and well-fed. It's a lot of responsibility." And as they walked through the pasture, Ayana noticed Cole in the distance, working with a group of horses. He moved with the same quiet confidence she had observed when he first appeared at her mother's grave, and the animals seemed to trust him instinctively. "Cole's really good with horses," Diego observed, following her gaze. "He has a way of understanding them that's almost supernatural." "How long has he been here?" "About 2 years. He showed up one day just like you did, looking for a place to belong." Maria offered